Okay, we're going to begin. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mrs. Weber, can you please call the roll?
Here.
Here.
I believe Mr. Evans is participating via Zoom. Can you tell if he's assigned? Okay. Mr. Mercurio
Here.
and Mrs. Weiss.
Here. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I need a motion for the approval of the agenda, which includes the addendum to the agenda, items 7 and 8 under the superintendent's agenda, and under the personnel consent agenda 1E, 1F, 4F, and under the other Board of Education business number 5.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber?
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mr. Evans. Has Mr. Evans entered the meeting? Okay, thank you. Okay. Mr. Evans, thank you. We are taking the roll on approval of the agenda and addendum. Oh, I think we need to unmute him. Okay. Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans. This guy. Mr. Evans, we're calling the roll for the agenda and the addendum. Can you hear me? Very good. Mr. Evans, we're calling the roll for the approval of the agenda and the addendum. Could we have your vote, please? He must not be, if you think he can't hear us. Okay, so we'll move forward. Mr. Mercurio
Aye.
and Mrs. Weiss.
Aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Weber, can you please talk about our meeting protocol, please?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Weiss. We're in a little bit different format than we've been in the last couple of months in that we're doing kind of a hybrid of a virtual meeting. So we do have participants in the meeting who are here via Zoom. We are also live streaming the meeting from our website, and then also have our in-person attendees today. So our protocol remains much the same. We do have Mr. Fritz and Mr. Lewis, who are moderators for our meeting today. And so they will be accepting any kinds of comments that we might have from our participants via Zoom in the chat. We ask that those of you who are participating in terms of board members or presenters to instead make sure that any of your comments are verbal as opposed to via the chat feature. For today, we do have a few things that are different. As I mentioned, Mr. Evans is participating via Zoom. Per Ohio Revised Code, he can participate in this format and vote as long as we can see him. We can capture and provide to the public being able to see him and hear his vote. So that's the clarification that we got from legal counsel. that allows him to virtually participate in the meeting, including his voting rights. So he will be able to participate that way. As far as public participation, we also have an item on today's agenda, a public hearing for the reemployment of the treasurer, that being me. When we get to that point in the agenda, Mrs. Weiss will re-clarify this, but should anyone have any comments for the public hearing, those of you who are in attendance, if you want to speak and make any comments, we will take those participants first. If there's anyone who is participating virtually, we are going to ask that you put an item into the chat that you would like to speak, that you'd like to provide comment on that item, and Mr. Lewis or Mr. Fritz will make us aware of that so that we can include, or so that we can allow anyone who wants to participate in the hearing that way. So we'll figure this all out as we get through it. So, but if you have any questions or anything that we need to have clarified via during the meeting in terms of how this will be conducted, please make sure that you ask and we'll clarify that. So Mrs. Weiss, anything else?
No, thank you, Mrs. Weber. Okay, so moving along to the public hearing to reconsider the reemployment of Beth Weber. At its June 17th meeting, the Board of Education approved the retirement of Beth Weber, treasurer, as of August 30th, 2020. Later in this meeting, the board will consider her reemployment to the same position effective September 1st, 2020 through July 31st of 2022. This timeframe allows the district stability of leadership of our financial affairs at a critical time and provides a window in what we hope to be better times to search for Mrs. Weber's successor. The overall cost to the district of Mrs. Weber's salary and benefit package will be reduced by approximately $26,000 annually. Per ORC 3309.345, the Board of Education must follow a process to consider her reemployment, including conducting a public hearing. At this time, the board will provide opportunity for public comment. We will first accept comments from anyone in attendance. If you are participating via Zoom, please enter a comment now in chat, and the moderator will inform us that you wish to speak. Mr. Fritz and Mr. Lewis, are there any comments in chat as of now? Okay. I guess we'll move on. Thank you so much. All right, to the superintendent's agenda, Mr. Forstoffel.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. I'm honored today to kind of give an update on where we're at with our Healthy Back to School 2020 reopening plan and to affirm the plan that was approved by the board last week. So I'm going to work through a number of slides today, much of which will be information about some of the data we've collected over the past week or so related to student, family, and staff intent as we look to open a new school year. So I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth. I've got Mr. Fritz driving this for me today, so I'll kind of give him a heads up when I'm ready to change slides. Does that make sense? Or Mr. Lewis? Okay, thank you. So as we've moved forward, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do, actually they're going to give me the keys. That's pretty dangerous. There we go. Members of the board, you have seen these before. These have been our North Stars as we've looked at how we want to put our plan together to reopen. We certainly have really stood tall on our principles for a healthy back to school, making sure we're thinking about the health and safety of all of our members of our family, while we're also ensuring that we are able to be flexible and nimble in whatever plan that we put forward, and hopefully you've seen that as we move forward, and to be able to adjust at a moment's notice if necessary per health conditions. So we continue to kind of circle back to this and make sure that we're in a good place as we think about all of the details that need to be worked on as we think about this plan moving forward. So let's talk about what we've done since the last time we chatted and we were together. As you know, you approved our plan, which gave families choices and gave them the choice to send their students back and their children back, either in a face-to-face model or to select a virtual opportunity. Here are some data points. We'll get a little bit more granular with these in just a moment, but you will see that number as the total enrollment as of now. Following the responses, our initial registration and our last call window, we had 5,457 responses from our students and our families, which is an amazing response rate for this community, and I want to thank the community for that. As you can see, there are about 200 of our students that have not responded, and we have now enrolled them in a face-to-face learning model, and we've also accounted for their need to have transportation. So we wanted to make sure that if they need transportation, they have it in the event that they do need it. We're certainly very pleased with this response. So that's kind of the global overarching view. So let's talk a little bit about kind of drilling down into some of the more specific data. So in terms of our district-wide student registration, and I will share this because I'm not sure, Mr. Fritz, can the members who are virtually see this? They can. Okay, good. Perfect. Perfect. So from a district-wide and student registration, we had 64.8% of our families choose the face-to-face model, while 35% chose the virtual opportunity for their students. And if you think of it, and you can see right there, you can see those raw numbers that are affixed with those percentages. And just thinking about a virtual opportunity, that's almost 2,000 students that we're going to have to provide a really robust virtual opportunity and really think about how we staff that moving forward. Technically that'll be the biggest school in the district. Let's just call that what it is, and we're going to have to make sure we provide the support necessary in order to do that. So as we move on, let's kind of break it down by building. And remember now, these are student registrations by building. So you can see at Blue Ash Elementary we have a 55% face-to-face and a 44, almost 45% virtual opportunity that's almost half at Blue Ash Elementary. So you can see we're going to have to do some thinking there in terms of how we handle that at Blue Ash Elementary. Moving on, you will see that we have Mapledale Elementary. The number of face-to-face, or the percentage of face-to-face, is higher at almost 73%, with the virtual being almost 27%. There's a less than 1% students that have chosen to withdraw for whatever reason. Continuing with our elementaries, at Montgomery Elementary, we have almost a 66% face-to-face registration with a 34% virtual registration. A little less than Mapledale, but certainly higher than Blue Ash. And then as we move forward with Sims Elementary, you can see that is almost a 50-50 split with virtual and face-to-face, with a small, very small, less than 1% percentage of withdrawal. So that's our elementary. You can see kind of in two pockets a little bit, almost a half and half at two of our buildings, but then almost kind of a, I would say, 75-25 at the other two, roughly somewhere in there. All right, and then moving on, if we come to this building right here at the intermediate building, we have a 63% for green face-to-face and a 36% virtual. So that's a good number there. And then moving on to the junior high school, our 7th and 8th graders, 61% and 38% face-to-face versus virtual. A little less than green, but not much, but similar to green, I would say. And then if we look at Sycamore High School, this is a little bigger number. We have almost a 72% face-to-face opportunity, with a 28% who have chosen the virtual opportunity for our 9th through 12th graders. Okay? So, you can see a little bit of the differences inherently within our 7 schools and how we're going to handle that. When I get to the staff, you'll kind of see how we're going to try and work to align some of that with our staff, both in the face-to-face and the virtual model. So moving on, one of the other questions that we asked on the survey was, will you be utilizing our buses moving forward? So you will see there that almost 59% of our families responded that they will be utilizing Sycamore Transportation, while 42% said that they would use alternative transportation. I know Mr. Miller is now digging into that very, very carefully in terms of how he routes and how he sets up specific seating charts on buses. I would say that a 42% people that have chosen the alternative transportation allows us to spread kids out better on buses, and that's a good thing. So I'm grateful for that.
Mr. Forstoffel,
Yes.
can I ask a clarification
Yeah.
point? Is that percentage for the students going face-to-face or the total student population?
That's face-to-face.
Thank you.
Yep, that's face-to-face. But I would also share that with that 42% providing alternative transportation, we've got some logistical things we need to think about at our buildings for drop-off and pickup. So we got to work through that, and I know our building administrators are thinking about how that's going to work when you significantly increase the car traffic at our buildings. Okay, so let's move on then to staff. Equally, as we got intentions from our students and families, we wanted to kind of get some clarification from our staff in terms of what their intentions were. And we started with our certificated staff, and I want to thank our staff for their responding at a 100% completion rate. One of the things that we are doing now is we are meeting individually with those staff members who have indicated they have a medical need or maybe in need of some modification or accommodation to their work environment. And Mr. Wallace and his team in the HR department are working very carefully with every individual staff member to ensure that we can do everything we can to accommodate those individuals. So 471 certificated staff, 100% completion rate. Let's talk now a little bit about breaking that down a little bit by individual building to kind of see how that aligns or maybe doesn't align with the student registrations. So let's talk first. Let's go big and let's do district-wide first. You can see that 80%, 4/5 of our staff, the certificated staff, expressed their intent to come back in a face-to-face model. I'm grateful that the staff have thought about that. So we've got a large majority of our staff who are ready to come back in a face-to-face model, with 20% expressing interest in being in the virtual mode of delivering education. Included within that virtual model will be some staff members that may have some medical exemptions and some accommodations, so we're going to look through that as well. It's a very small number. We are working with selected staff that have requested for specific reasons some type of leave, specifically a leave of absence, so we're working very carefully with that staff as well. Okay, so that's the district. So remember, kind of an 80-20 split there. At Blue Ash Elementary, you can see 82% of the Blue Ash staff have expressed an interest to come back to face-to-face, while 18% have expressed virtual. Let me remind you what that student breakout was. It was 55 and 44 with the students. So we've got some work to do in terms of how we align the staff at Blue Ash Elementary with the students who are in virtual. So it will cause us to get some movement with staff throughout the district as we accommodate all of those different offerings within a building and from a district perspective. I will share with the board that we are working closely on that now, and I would suspect probably within the next week or so we'll have some more clarity around how we're going to do that. That's a very complicated, large puzzle that we have to work on, and we're beginning to do that right now as early as tomorrow morning, as we're meeting with the K-6 principals to kind of put all that together as they're thinking about their sections in their buildings. Okay, so that's Blue Ash Elementary. If we move on to Mapledale Elementary, almost 84% of that staff have expressed interest in coming back face-to-face, and almost 16% have expressed an interest in being virtual. A reminder about the student percentage, that was a 72-27 split from the student percentage. So A little closer aligned, but still a little bit of a gap there, so we're going to have to figure out how we handle that. Moving on, at Montgomery Elementary, again, we've got, this kind of mirrors the district percentage, kind of an 80-20 split with the great Montgomery staff. From a student perspective, as a reminder, that was a 65-34, so a little bit bigger gap right there in terms of how we handle that. Okay, Sims Elementary. Now, a reminder for the Sims student, that was almost an even 50-50 split, but you can see there that we've got an 85% respondents from the staff there that have expressed an interest in coming back face-to-face, with a 15% expressing an interest to go virtual. So we've got quite a bit of spread there, and we're going to have to figure out how we handle that with
So,
the
Mr.
Sims staff.
Forstoffel,
Yes.
with that, just a couple of things. We're not thinking at this point of moving students from, we're not thinking about moving students from one building to another, correct?
Not physically,
Right, okay.
but we could, from a virtual standpoint, there could be some blending of elementary students in a virtual model.
Okay.
Depending on how that puzzle piece comes together.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
but
thank
not from a physical standpoint as of now.
Okay.
Right now, the elementary principals are putting their sections together, and if you look at those percentages in a good way, from a physical distancing standpoint, that allows us now to certainly do a better job in our classrooms of distancing students, because we have such a higher population of our students who have chosen the virtual aspect.
Okay,
Okay.
great, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the green staff. We have a almost 75-25 split there in terms of face-to-face and virtual. The student registration was a 63-36 spread. So we do have a little bit of gap there, but not that big. And I know Mr. Tudor's working very closely on how he handles that within his building. And initial responses, we've got more work to do that we're going to be able to handle both of those here with hopefully minimal staff changes here at the Green School. Okay. At the junior high, again, about a 75-25 split. The student was 62-38. When we get into the 7 through 12, it's going to get really complicated because of this course offerings that are inherent in each of those buildings. So we're working very closely on that. And you will see that when I get to the high school as well. We are making inroads as both Dr. Ray and Mr. Mader are putting together their master schedules and figuring out classes. I will share that Mr. Mader shared with me yesterday. He'll have about 4 separate master schedules running at the same time, and I don't know how he's going to do that, but we trust him, so he'll do a great job with it as well. So this is a very complicated thing that we're working on. It's about making sure that we're able to offer as the robust course selections that we can, while ensuring we get students and staff in the right place to deliver those. And as we talked last time, that may involve some selected live streaming opportunities for some of our discrete classes. When I say discrete, I mean unique classes that, or maybe, for lack of a better term, singletons, for example. So we're looking at that as well. So that's the junior high. At the high school, you will see at a 78-22. That's mirrors pretty well what the student was. That was about 73 to 27 or so. So we're pretty close on that one. So hopefully we can get some alignment with that as well. So as you can see, we've got 2 major data points that we have to work at. We've got where our students have landed and what our staff have expressed an interest in. And right now, the heavy work and the heavy lifting is matching those 2 data sets together so we can match up the physical, the face-to-face students with the right staff and doing the very same thing on the virtual end as well. We are making progress. It will take us just a little bit more time because as we put that together, then I know certainly all 7 of our principals want to get some definition around that so they can communicate to families. Here's your class, here's your teacher, here's your schedule, here's your classes, and so forth. So we're trying to bring those together right now. But I think we're in really good shape. Okay? So any questions on the data? Let me pause there for a moment before I move on. Okay?
Mr. Forstoppel,
Yep,
just
absolutely.
one question.
Yep.
The inference on class size, there appears that there would be a smaller class size in the face-to-face. That would imply a larger class size for virtual?
There may be a slightly larger class size but we're going to keep that as minimal as we possibly can. And I think that will be indicative of how many staff members we can get in the virtual. Our intent is not to overload the virtual classes. It is not. And as superintendent, please hear me on that. But there may be a slight uptick in that. Nothing to be overly concerned about, but we're working through that right now. I know there's been stuff out there about models, about virtual classrooms having upwards of 50 kids. That will not happen here in Sycamore. You have my guarantee that we will not do that. But there could be a slight increase in that. Okay?
Thank
Great
you.
question. Thank you for asking that, because that certainly was probably a question that's out in the community. Okay? Okay, so let me just briefly touch a little bit about classified and where we're at. We've certainly, those amazing people that support us in our buildings and support students, we wanted to get their attention as well. Our number right now, total classified staff, 296. We got 251 responses from that. A majority of the non-respondents, a lot of those people are already at work and have been working throughout the summer. And we are either have returned to work or we're assuming they are returning to work. We'll continue to touch base with them. As you can see in the next slide, you can see that, a major portion plan to return or already have returned to work. We do have a few that have requested a leave that we're working with specifically to ensure that they are safe and have everything that they need, so we're working through that as well. So we're in good shape from a classified staff, and I'm very pleased with that leading in. So that is basically where we're at with our data. And now it's a matter of merging the data points together to make sure that we put this together. So what's happening around that? So right now, we are in the process, along with our building administrators, in creating face-to-face and virtual class lists and schedules. That's the work right now, and it's moving along. I will share with you that it's challenging work, but we're working through that. We are working very carefully, Mr. Comerford, to your comment about making those class sizes palatable. I've seen some early indications from the elementaries that our typical class sizes in the elementaries are 20 to 25. We're now in the 15 to 16 range in our classrooms, face-to-face, I would say. I haven't seen the virtual yet, so we're looking at that right now. We'll continue to look at that very, very carefully to make sure that those classrooms are put up in a way that is safe for everybody. Related to that, obviously, as we're putting those classes together, we have to then assign requisite staff to those and assign teachers to those various classrooms. As you can see from the data, we certainly have more face-to-face teachers, so we may have to get creative in how we do that and making sure that our virtual classes are well-staffed. And that may have to have some conversations with some folks that maybe we might ask them to consider a virtual model when they had expressed the face-to-face model, but we'll work through that. Again, trying to align to make sure that our class sizes are palatable to this community. Transportation, Mr. Miller and his team has that well taken care of. They're working through that very carefully. I will remind you that we have instituted a change with our typical transportation variance form, and that we're limiting that to 1. In this unusual time, it really just helps with the overall routing, that we minimize the number of variances that families have in terms of their drop-off and pickups, and that's been communicated. We are also now that we are getting a better handle on the size of the students in the size of the classrooms and the number of students in our classrooms, we're now very carefully physically mapping all of our classrooms. And that's across the district to make sure we have the proper space, both for students and teachers as well. And then in just a moment, I'll share a little bit about preschool. We've made a slight tweak to preschool, at least to start the year. We think that was an important change to do as we look at how we serve our youngest aviators. So any questions on that? It's a lot underneath that, but that's the big work that's happening in the next week or so. Okay? All right, other things that is currently in progress. One of the things that we have considered, and you will see this on an agenda item later this morning, is creating virtual classroom space for our staff and how we provide, the best opportunity for them to do their jobs in the best possible way. They are such talented people, and we want to provide that. So we have, and you will see this in a little bit, located what we think is very good space within the district that will allow our virtual classroom teachers to really create that sense of community that they need to do while being certainly safe within that work environment as well. One of the other things that I will share with you, that as I just mentioned, when you have 1,984 students in the virtual classroom with, you could have upwards of 80 staff potentially handling that. That's a large school. So we're going to need some administrative oversight of that. So I'm in the process of putting that plan together that will provide some leadership to that new way of delivering education. So I, at some point, will bring a recommendation to the board for that as well, for a 1-year oversight of that plan.
Mr. Forstoffel?
Yes.
So the idea is that all virtual teachers will be physically present in some building while they're teaching virtually.
That is correct.
It'll not be done from their homes.
Right. Other than those virtual teachers that may have very specific health needs that may predicate that they be at home, and we're going to work with them specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, but your premise is correct.
Thank you.
And all the more reason that we need the leadership oversight of that as well. And and I'm thinking about that kind of in a 3-tiered, having district oversight, having a building oversight. When I say building, I mean in that space to provide ready support for our teachers, and then a layer of technology support for our staff that will be in that environment as well. I think it's important that our staff be together from the virtual standpoint from that 3rd tier. We want to make sure we envelop them with the kind of tech support they may need. It would be significantly challenging if we had 80 to 100 staff, in my mind, spread out in their homes while trying to provide this what we hope will be a great opportunity for students, but also to provide them that support. So yet another reason that we think it's important to do that. Okay? And I know there's been some questions about some of the specific elective courses, i.e. band, orchestra, and the electives. I'll be very honest with you, we've got some work to do there. We are meeting with principals and teachers around what that might look like within our buildings. If you think about art, music, and PE at K-6, there's some discussions around doing that on a rotating basis, so both physically and in how we might do that in a virtual standpoint. Related to band and orchestra, we have received some initial guidance from the Hamilton County Health Department that does allow that to happen, but with some very specific distancing requirements for those two things, and we're going to work through that with those teachers as well. But it may look different, obviously, so
Right.
we're going to work very carefully on that as well.
And Mr. Forstoffel,
Yes.
for that, for say, grades, I guess that would be 6 through 12, related to band and orchestra. The intent is not that if a student selects the virtual classroom model, that they are not coming physically into the building to take those courses. Is
That would not be
correct?
our intent right
Okay.
now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, let's talk athletics for a moment. There's a lot going on with athletics. All you have to do is read the newspaper, look on social media, or listen to the governor for that aspect. I want to thank Mr. Harden and his team, our athletic director, for how he's handled athletics actually since the start of June, when the go-ahead was given for practice to begin and for that to resume. As you know, there was some specific opportunities for our athletes to come in this summer and train. Mr. Harden and his team, along with our partners from Tri-Health and the trainers, put together some very specific protocol to allow our students to do some training with their coaches and move through the summer. As we all know, and as we think about what fall looks like and that August 1 date, that's kind of the trigger point for fall sports. We've been waiting anxiously for some guidance, not only from the Ohio High School Athletic Association, but from the Ohio Department of Health, i.e. the governor, to see what was allowable to do. So what we know now is that we are allowed for both contact sports and non-contact sports. Practices have resumed, and there are very specific protocol. I shared the protocol with the Board of Education that has been put in place in collaboration with the remaining GMC athletic directors and superintendents. We've been meeting weekly with the GMC superintendents and athletic directors to make sure that we're all in alignment on the protocol that needs to be utilized to ensure that our students are safe, but they are allowed to participate based on the current orders out there. So both contact sports and non-contact sports, they are allowed to and have resumed practicing. For non-contact sports, as of now, competitions between schools are permitted. For contact sports, intra-school scrimmages for now are put on hold. So that would mean, logistically, no Sycamore versus Lakota West football scrimmage for now. Okay, let's just give a specific example. That's what is in place right now. We did listen very interestingly to the governor yesterday in the hopes that we would hear some clarification on what sports may look like, fall sports. We did not hear that yesterday. I know the lieutenant governor has been kind of spearheading this from a state level, and he's been talking with the board of directors from the Ohio High School Athletic Association to try and ensure that if sports are permitted, it's done in a very safe way. I will share with you there is a notion out there about something with contact sports and competition and this testing requirement. And there's a current order in place that was put in place in July for a very specific athletic event in Columbus. It was a basketball tournament. It was an adult basketball tournament. And they allowed that to go forward if before any competition, i.e. those games, there was testing for every athlete within a 72-hour window. Well, that current order is still in place for contact sport competition. We need to see if that's going to be in place or if the governor's office is going to make some changes on that. But I would share with you that if that currently is in place and remains in place, that's going to be a challenge for us to do a 72-hour within a COVID test for every athlete within 72 hours of their competition. That will be challenging for us, and we'd have to think about how we're even able to do that. And I think the rest of the GMC schools are thinking about that as well. I'm not sure what will happen, but that needs to be kind of a decision point from the governor's office to determine whether contact sports can move forward or not. Okay? So just be aware of that. I'm very pleased. I think the GMC athletic directors and the superintendent, my colleagues, have done a good job in putting those protocols in place. I would share with you that our protocols this summer have been very, very solid. We have had 2 student positive tests all summer with all of our athletes, and that happened, I think, within the first week of training that happened this summer. We followed the protocol exactly, took care of it, and handled it really, really well. So I'm very pleased with how the athletic department and our coaches handled summer training, and I would anticipate that moving forward. Okay? So as you can see, and you've probably seen the details for some of our safety protocols, those are just the higher level things. There's so many other things in that document that I presented to you, including if we ever got to game situations for contact sports and how we handle game sites, how we handle crowds, and all of the things. Mr. Harden has a detailed plan in place in anticipation that we may be able to host athletic events for the fall. And then again, you know, I'm incredibly pleased that our concept about our data and risk assessment team and how we're able to really track the data And we will utilize that data tracking as we also look at our athletes. And Mr. Mercurio, I want to thank you for your leadership in that. And we've got some data to get to you as it relates to that. You know, one of the decisions that we need to make, and I've kind of shared this from a superintendent perspective about the connection between athletics and extracurriculars as it relates to the learning model that we're in. And I know we're going to look at the data as we move forward. But from a global perspective, if we would have to translate to a full remote, district-wide, then it would be my recommendation that we suspend athletics and extracurriculars as well. When we get below that, then I think we have some opportunities to really look and see how we can handle those safely. And I would say that that first statement that I said is fairly much in alignment with the rest of the GMC schools and what the other superintendents and athletic directors are saying. You can attach it to purple if you want. It doesn't always have to be that way, but full remote would mean a suspension of athletics and extracurriculars. I'm conflicted by that, I'll be honest with you, but I know athletics is an important opportunity and connections and relationships for kids, but I just think it's hard as a school district that if the idea around full remote is to stop the spread, we also have athletes coming in. So it's a complicated matrix, but that's kind of where I'm landing right now. Okay?
Mr. Forstoffel,
Yes.
where do we stand on students that will be learning virtually and participate in the option to participate in extracurricular activities or sports?
It would be our intent that if they're virtually, they are allowed to participate in interscholastic sports. Okay? All right, so let's see, that's athletics. Oh, wait, sorry. Let me go back. One of the things I wanted to touch base with the board on is related to preschool. We have such a robust and great preschool opportunities. We've been watching the rules and regs around preschool, and for the longest time, public school preschools were put under the guidelines and restrictions under private daycares, under JFS, Jobs and Family Services, which really hindered our ability to do the distancing within the classroom. There was things about space and barriers and things like that, and it really proved problematic for us in terms of offering the full extent of our preschool. Now remember now, in our preschools we have a 50-50 split with half the class students on IEPs and half the class are typical preschools. So we found that to be certainly challenging for us under the current law. But remember, of course, that we are obligated by law to provide special education services for students that have been identified specifically at 3 and 4-year-olds. So we've been thinking about this very, very carefully, and for now, what we are proposing and what we would like to do is certainly for our students that are on IEPs, our 3 and 4-year-olds, we will do a face-to-face learning model only for those students. Logically, that makes sense. But then for our typical kids, at least for the first quarter, for the first quarter, we're only going to service those students that are on IEPs, bring those in physically, kind of see how things go. If the mandates are lessened a little bit and we're able to do more of what a typical public school preschool as opposed to the guidelines under JFS, we will continue and think about allowing our typicals to come back at the end of the first quarter, which is sometime in October. That has been communicated to our families. Certainly those that have already paid tuition, they won't have to pay tuition for that first quarter. So we're trying to give ourselves a little window for our typical students that they could come in. I will share with you many districts that I'm aware of around the area have just suspended completely typical preschools because of this. We're thinking about it a little differently and given a little bit of time, and if there's any opportunity to bring the typical kids, preschool kids in, we will do that and do that in a safe manner. Okay? Okay, and then as we aim for the start of another school year, I'm very grateful to the Board of Education for allowing me as superintendent to modify the calendar to give necessary time for our staff to get ready for students either face-to-face and virtually. and we are putting together a very comprehensive professional development and training menu for our staff coming back. We have worked really hard to get all the vested parties involved and to provide feedback. Many thanks to Mrs. Neighbor, Mrs. Wagner, and the entire team, and to the Staff Development Committee, who've worked really hard to put this plan together. It's still in the works. Our principals have been very much involved with that as well, to make sure that our teachers have what they need to do the very best that they can, knowing this is such a different time, such a different time. So you can see the levels of feedback. So as we think about some of the topics that are going to be addressed in those professional learning days that will occur prior to the start of our students coming, you can see that whole list there. It's a combination of both curriculum, teaching strategies. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're taking care of the mental wellness of our students and our staff, so there'll be some of that. There'll be some training on some safety procedures. And then maybe most important is that necessary and very important time that our teams of teachers need to have together, that they can collaborate to ensure that they've got their curriculum aligned, that they've got their teaching strategies lined up, but also that alignment between, as you know, we want to make sure that there's time for collaboration between our face-to-face staff and our virtual staff as well, so we can keep those two tracks aligned as well. So that vertical, and sometimes horizontal collaboration will be critically important as well. So we're excited about that, and I want to thank the team for putting that together. Here's kind of just a snapshot. Some of these details are still being worked on, but you can see we're going to give our staff some time in their classrooms as they need to put that together and think about what their day is going to look like and their space is going to look like. The building principals need time with their staffs to work through many of the logistics and the curriculum development. And then there's some other things in here that we're going to deliver, whether it be from a mental wellness, from some of our outside professionals, our I2s and our teacher leaders will be delivering some of these as well. Key component around that is finding time for our staff to collaborate together so they are as best prepared as they possibly can to welcome our students back.
Mr. Forstoffel,
Yes.
on the professional learning days, what is the total number of days, though? I'm trying to remember back from the calendar adjustment. Was it 10 days?
I think it's 10.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure when we're looking at this slide of professional learning, it's not just 5 days.
No.
Okay.
It's full 10.
Right, okay,
It's full
thank
10.
you.
We just kind of gave you a snapshot of what some of those days may look like.
Thank you.
As that works through. And then finally, if I may, let's talk about what we think is a very solid process to make decisions about what mode that we're in. I shared this at the last meeting. We have really taken a different approach to this in terms of providing information, suggestions, recommendations to the superintendent as I make decisions about whether we're face-to-face or in a remote model. We have convened what I think is an amazing team. You'll see a few of those representatives right there to really start to think about the kinds of information and data that we need to look at to allow me to make the best decision that I can in the interests of students and staff in this community. We had kind of our first meeting on Monday, and it was a very productive meeting. Mr. McCurry, I'm grateful that you were a part of that. And we started to look at some things that might be helpful for us as we start to look at the data. And we're thinking about, and actually in the process of putting together what we're considering a data dashboard that we will have access to, that the superintendent will have access to on a daily basis. And thinking about that as the most relevant data that we can have that will allow me to make those decisions. These are just some general ideas about what some of that data might look like, and you can see that ranging from county to district data around cases. There may be other things that we want to put in there. There's going to be some building-specific and district-specific data related to what's going on specifically in a school or in a classroom that I will look at as well. And so we're going to put that whole matrix together. I think the idea is we're going to look at some trending data. I think that's important as well. And then how we look at how we compare that to what's going on around us as well. So, Mr. Mercuro, did I articulate that in a decent way?
Yeah, I think you covered it well.
Okay.
Mr. Forstoff, although I just want to, for clarity purposes, you say you're going to communicate on Friday what's going on in the district. If there were an outbreak or something earlier in the week, you're not going to wait till Friday to make a decision.
No, I certainly would never do that. And the reality of that, Mr. Ballard, is we look at it as we deal with specific instances within, a potential classroom and then the potential impact into other classrooms in a building. Those may need to be decisions that need to come quicker. This weekly thing that we're going to do is more from a district holistic look at it, but certainly understand that we'll be on the alert every single day if we need to make a different decision related to a more targeted approach. Great question.
So just another
Yep.
point of clarification. So buildings are not going to be specifically communicating out about information that the data monitoring and risk assessment, that would come from your office?
Yeah.
And then will athletics be folded into this data? So we're not expecting our athletic director to compile his own statistics on what's going on with athletes, but that's going to be all folded into the data analysis?
It will be folded in. I'm going to talk with Mr. Harden today based on some communication from Mr. McCure on how we get that data from the athletic department. I may have to rely on the athletic department to provide that data because, I'm not close to it as they are. They've got the data from the summer, but as we move into the fall, providing me that opportunity to look at that on a daily basis.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. So that's the update. I will share with you that there's a lot of work to be done yet, and we're working really hard to do that, as I've shared at the beginning. The hardest work and the heavy lift right now is, now that we have the student and staff data, how we marry those two sets of data together to put our classes together moving forward. So I welcome any questions. I'm grateful to the board for your leadership and the questions and the things that I need to think about from a district perspective. I'm grateful to the board for that.
Mr. Forstoffel, one of the tenets of the plan was to provide choice for the families, but also for our certified staff.
Right.
When I look at the numbers, it seems like, is it fair to say that any of the certified staff that wanted to teach virtually will not be asked to go face-to-face because of the numbers that we have on a by-building basis, where in all cases, higher demand?
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment. We have to drill down a little deeper simply because of the numbers. You've got face-to-face virtual up here, but then you've got a little bit more alignment here with students requiring virtual. So I can't think of a possibility where someone wouldn't be able, if they requested virtual, to do that. I think it may go the other way, however, because we're right now, based on the numbers of students requiring virtual and then the requisite intent from staff wanting to go virtual, we may have to do some realignment there.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Okay? Thank you very much. We'll continue to provide the updates as we move along. Thank you.
Okay, I think Mr. Forstoffel, we're moving along to presentation of Synovation Lab data.
Absolutely. As the great team from the high school comes forward, I'm going to give them the clicker and wipe it off. I very much appreciate the board's interest in ensuring our Synovation Lab is doing the very best it can for our students. We have worked really hard to put together some clear data points that hopefully will give the board a snapshot of how our kids are doing in the Synovation Lab as compared to our students in our more traditional model. Mr. McCure, I want to thank you and Mrs. Wagner for working very carefully on the cohort model match and how that model, very unique way of putting it together. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Mader and his team, Dr. Warren and Mr. Cole, who are going to walk us through this presentation. Mr. Mader, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So about a little over 3 years ago, we embarked on a startup in education, which is rarely done. We put a team of teachers and administrators together that did all the work and dug deep into the trenches. So what we would like to do, before we get to the data that you've asked for some time, is just to kind of reflect on why we did it, how it connects to what we're doing in the future, and then really get into the data and talk about what we've learned and where we're going to go from there. It is important to say that the people that have been in the trenches, Dr. Warren, Mr. Cole, and all the teachers, have worked harder in the last 3.5 years than they have in their whole career. It's the most challenging thing we've done in education, well, until what we're about to embark on. So we're really proud of what is happening in that Innovation Lab. And the first thing we want to talk about is really the purpose statement and how it connects to the vision of our master facility plan. We talk about preparing the students for what their opportunities lie ahead, and talk about the flexibility of our spaces for innovative programming so that we can focus on essential skills for our students to prepare them for the future. So that brings us right to what is the problem statement that we started with. And I'll let Dr. Warren talk about the original questions we started with and then dig a little deeper so all the board members, even ones that are new, are really up to speed of what we're trying to do in this Innovation Lab.
So when we first posed our questions to the board and to district office about this Innovation Lab, you'll see that those two questions were right there. What if students were given the opportunity to define who they are to themselves within the community? And then how does Sycamore Community Schools position itself to be competitive in an area now where we're seeing educational leadership, educational platforms transforming? And that looks even different as we're in this pandemic today. So those were our original questions, and those came from talking to students, talking to staff members that just kept asking questions. What if? What if I just had like 10 more minutes to finish that chemistry lab? What if I just had a little bit extra time to work with a teacher one-on-one? So what we did from those original questions was we started to ask why, and we also started to ask what are the gaps and how can we start to fill those in. So we had focus groups of students, families, teachers, as well as other educators from around the nation. That timeline happened from September till about January. And the findings, what we heard, and I think the biggest common theme from what you have seen up there in the findings, is that students want to have a space that's given for them to have personalized learning with teachers and with one another, to collaborate with one another without time restrictions, and to have more of a flexible schedule. So what we found was some students would just really like it if maybe we took away the bell schedule. So one of those gaps that we found for us and for some students was that if we provided a new structure to the school day, would that allow for personalization? So we looked at the things that we already do really, really well, and we do a lot of things really, really well. We were working through formative instructional practices, so teachers were already working on common assessments, that be formative as well as summative. We have a technology infrastructure. We have innovative educators. The teachers at Sycamore High School are truly the best. And they also have best practices that they're constantly collaborating on. All of those things together, though, with now a flexible bell schedule, is how we get to what was missing, which was personalized learning. So the Innovation Lab, again, became the Innovation Lab really with that one gap of that flexible schedule could lead us to personalized learning.
And so, obviously, we are going into year 3. As we were beginning plans for how to launch and start this Innovation Lab, the naming was a big first one. And so, Synovation is Sycamore and innovation. And the term lab, I think, is important. It's innovative for the students. It's innovative for the teachers. We give students an opportunity to explore their interests. We give them an opportunity to take ownership of their learning. Just as an example, yesterday I had a student who was creating a barcode reader to help students check in and out of the lab. It's the summer. but it's a space that's given him an opportunity to do that. And then for us teachers, it's given us a chance to innovate. How do we personalize learning? How do we help create increased ownership? And so over our time, we've gone through the vision statement, mission statement. As a former coach, I was all about, like, what are the phrases that you call out? And so our pillars are community, personalization, meaningful learning opportunities. And for us, it was important that those were simple, they were clear. We're about building a community among the students, between the students and the teachers, have a very unique relationship. Had lunch with 2 students at B-dubs yesterday. It's important that relationship is different. Personalization, again, trying to make the learning match their interests, their future, their path. And then meaningful learning opportunities could be PBL, but it's also, you'll see later on, getting them involved in universities and Kroger Tech, and making our content relevant to them and their future learning. And so that is where we have come the last couple of years. One of the important things, though, is to think about how this Innovation Lab is similar to the traditional student experience. It is a school within a school concept. The students are still members of Sycamore High School. They show up in the morning, they ride the bus, they participate in clubs, activities. They have access to the same curriculum, the same graduation requirements. They're taught by Sycamore teachers with Sycamore curriculum that's aligned to Ohio State standards. So much of the experience on the big structure is the same. And so what we want to do is to be able to then compare our students, and we'll talk more about how it's unique later, with the Innovation Lab students and the traditional students at Sycamore High School.
So starting off with our success measures, the ones that we're going to focus on first are just those that are comparable to the traditional school. So we had AIR, ACT, AP. We looked at the number of credits that students earned versus attempted. We looked at GPA, discipline, and incompletes. So what Mr. Cole had mentioned, that once we talk about those, we'll then get into the unique specific success measures of returning students, engagement in learning, as well as college and career readiness.
So luckily, before our new learning environment happened, I decided to go get another master's degree. And it happened that this summer I was taking a course on action research. And as part of that, I had to take a collection of data and analyze it and write a 30-page paper about, connecting one thing and how it helps cause another. And so this opportunity to do this data worked perfectly with that program. And so the first thing that we did is, in conjunction with the administrators, we created a match group of students to compare Innovation Lab students and their performance on AIR and ACT tests, not just to the class at large, and we're going to focus on the class of 2021, which is the rising senior class, but also with a group of students who are matched based upon previous assessment data. And we'll talk about some of the challenges in that data, both from our student perspective and some of how the scores and we'll talk about that later. But in essence, with the help of Steve, we created a pretty wild spreadsheet, and I think that you guys got access to just the final one. If you would like, we can show you kind of all the sheets that merged into the one data sheet. It was actually pretty awesome. But as you can tell, our students on the AIR and the ACT, compared to the match group and compared to the class at large, performed very similarly to students in the traditional experience. The AIR tests, this is based on an average score over all the AIR tests. And again, as you get into AIR test data, a passing score on one test is not a passing score on the other test. And so again, there are some difficulties with that data. How does a student who took an AP class who didn't have to take the AIR test in that area, how does that work out? But that was consistent across all groups. And then same thing with the ACT. Not all students took the ACT, but they took assessments as a freshman and a sophomore. And so the program that we had, that if they did not take their junior level test, they reverted to their sophomore. If they didn't take either one of those, they reverted to their freshman, right? So there's, again, if you ever want to sit down and dig into that data, that's where that goes. So with this match data, again, some of the difficulties were that some students didn't take all the assessments, whether in our group or in the match group. Some students moved out of this Innovation Lab. Some students moved into this Innovation Lab. Some students were matched with one. There was one student I think was matched with 28 students. There were some students who were matched multiple times through. And so I think this is a good first use of the match data program. And I look forward, and this will be one of our future steps, is how to kind of modify that process to find a closer match between students. So as an example, I think it was student 38. One of their match scores on the ACT had a 14 and another one had a 28. And those two students were matched initially as what should have similar progress through school. And so how do we then dig into gender, age, socioeconomic status, all the things that might affect or impact a student's achievement. But given all of this is our first chance of doing that, I don't know any other school who's done this. I thought it was a great process for me to go through. I enjoyed it. But again, you can see that our students performed roughly the same as the students in the traditional experience as both model match and the class.
So the next success measures that we will look at are AP. When we look at AP, we think about our percentage as a school building of 3+. You can see that, again, our Sinovation Lab students and the building are performing similarly. We took our Sinovation Lab students specifically from the class of 2021. There were 56 tests that those particular students took. All of our students, because AP this year was a little bit different as well, that you had the ability to opt out of taking that test because it was virtual. All of our students did choose to take those tests versus some of the students in the other, in the traditional setting did opt out. So for the class of 2021, you can see their score, and again, both of them are very, very similar. The credits earned versus credits attempted, this one was really interesting to me. You can see that from the class of 2021 versus the Sinovation Lab students take about one more class than what is in the traditional setting. I think that happens because there's clear flexibility of a student to take more course offerings, potentially even electives within the lab. So we see that as something that's different, at least with the Sinovation Lab versus the class of 2021. The next success measures that we will look at. Yeah, please.
Can I ask a question on just a couple things on the AP classes? Sinovation Lab students are not taking those AP classes in Sinovation Lab, but are actually going out and taking the AP class with the AP teacher in the traditional environment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
There are a few classes that are AP in the Sinovation Lab, such as the junior level AP Langen Comp that's taught by Mr. Reardon. So we do offer some, but a majority of these students did take them out. You're welcome. The next success measure that we will look at are GPA, discipline incompletes. So with GPA, we looked at our Sinovation Lab students and saw that their GPA is of course higher than from what the class of 2021 average was, with them taking more classes because of the flexibility of their schedule. Also for them earning A's and B's, we anticipated that. The incompletes, when we looked at those, for the class of 2021 specifically, there were 7 incompletes of this particular class, and only one of those students came from the Sinovation Lab. With disciplines, this particular class last year had 136 discipline infractions, and 3 of those were students from the Sinovation Lab. We look a little bit further into what those are specifically for our community, and we see that those things happened outside of school.
It's important to point out in that GPA, the fairness of it. Is it fair that the GPA in the Sinovation Lab is greater than in the traditional setting? One thing to point out is, in the traditional setting, there's a lot of points built into that, and we call it playing school, where the Sinovation Lab is just assessments. And yes, it's mastery-based. They can take it over. In that combination, also with the extra credit, is the reason that you have a little bit higher GPA.
Just out of curiosity about the grading piece of that, I guess I struggle with that because if the idea is that if you're a Sinovation Lab student and the idea is that you're mastering the skill, the content, but you have multiple times to take that over in order to obtain a B or an A in the class, why would you not just give them the grade that they earn on that one time that they're taking the test, and then let them keep taking it to actually earn that B or that A? But what you're saying of, like, in the traditional model, you're basically saying that the grades that are earned are not really mastery of content because there's so much filler that students are getting. And I really struggle with that, because then that makes me think that we need to then look at our traditional environment, because the grading, as you're implying, is inflated. And I don't necessarily agree with that.
I'm glad you said that, because that is a huge philosophical debate. What is the purpose of education? Is the purpose of education to give grades, or is it for true learning? And I think we would all say, because we're educators, that our main purpose is learning the content. And we are spilling over into the traditional setting with mastery-based concepts. That's the uniqueness of the lab, and we'll get that in a little bit when we looked at the cost analysis of the money that we put in this innovation lab, how it's impacting the whole community of that school. And teachers are really looking at that. We have math teachers during the summer school that basically did the same thing. In chemistry, we have the same thing. It is spilling over. It is more difficult in a traditional setting at 48-minute bells to have that personalized back up, go, and those kind of things. So we're examining all those different pieces. Prior to the pandemic, as a leadership team, we're looking at our bell schedule. Is it what we really need? Can we do school different? Because our main concept is learning. If you truly ask an educator, if we could do away with grades altogether, that's the best school. And there's schools internationally that are doing that. So that is a huge debate. And I think the key is mastery and trying to master that learning concept.
So some of the learnings that you guys have had in this innovation lab to transfer over into the traditional environment, would you see a world where we would say to a traditional student, you know, you took this test at the scheduled time that you were supposed to take the test and you received a C. We're not going to put that C in the grade book, but you could take it again at another time. Is that a possibility, or is that kind of thing only reserved for students in this innovation lab?
No, absolutely not. Believe it or not, 17 years ago, I taught integrated math at the high school, and it was mastery-based. We didn't have technology like that, so there was a lot of worksheets and a lot of assessments, and I had a pack of them. And kids could try because those are the learners that we needed to build up. So this isn't a new concept, but I would agree with you, and we are trying to fill that gap in the traditional setting to allow more opportunities of that.
And then I
would
just
say that those things are happening in the traditional setting. There are teachers that are doing that more and more.
And I think to even dig into it deeper, I think it depends on what you're assessing. If you're focusing on skill assessment, then it's the iterative process of getting your final product to be great. So as an example, I did a lot of project-based stuff in American history, and so because I was meeting consistently with the students, they wouldn't really be turning it in or doing their final presentation until we had met and it was to the point that it needed to be, right? And so I think it also depends on how you're assessing students, if it's authentic assessments that are skill-based versus content-based assessments. And I think those are the summer conversations are happening, are which of those two things are the most important to assess, what's the weight of those assessments, what is the one that is more important later on, college and career readiness. I always use the phrase a great 26-year-old. Is it the core content, the skills that are embedded? And so I think that's some of the master-based questions that we've been able to ask with that.
And then just one other question on this, on the incomplete. So what's the date that you determine that there's an incomplete? So if at the end of the semester on May, whatever, 20-something, if that student has not obtained a B or an A on that assessment for that particular course, is that considered incomplete, or are you giving them 3 months into the summer to actually do it, and that's still considered a complete?
We can pull incompletes at the end of each semester, so just when the traditional setting looks. So these 7 incompletes were at the end of the 2019-2020 school year.
And just to be as transparent as we can, I mean, this Innovation Lab educators learned a lot in this process. And you will see some of the reflective practices that they've done and some of the, as in education, we call it mid-course corrections, in pacing, ensuring students are on task. Because we did have an issue at the beginning. Like, okay, well, we're in trouble, what do we do? And you'll see some of those stop gaps that we did, so we don't have a lot of incompletes anymore.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, yeah. So for retention measures, we both compared the class of 2021, since that was our ACT error data, as well as the whole group going from year 2 to year 3. You can see that after year 1, we had 12 students who chose to leave, including those 7 specific cases. After year 2, There's only 3 students from that class who chose to leave. We have not added, looking into year 3, we have not added any rising seniors at this point. When we looked at year 2 to year 3, one of the success measures was what is the percentage of retention. And what's interesting about this is that you're having students choose an academic program, right? It's different than choosing to remain with a sports team. These are students who would say, this academic program, I find value, I want to continue with it. 82.6% was based on not the 132. If you go down to that one, it's out of the 121. I subtracted 11 students, 4 who went to the Oaks, 2 moved, 5 who graduated, just to make sure that we were really choosing students who were choosing this innovation lab or not. So that took some adjustments. That's where that 82.6% has gone. So.
Have you used any of the data to determine what the right profile of student for the lab is? Because this isn't for everybody. So how have you used what you've learned to help your selection process so that the retention rate actually goes up?
Yeah, I think in a little bit what we did, just to talk about what we learned, is how we changed our marketing. One of the things that I think early on that the idea of this innovation lab was work at my own pace. The self-pacing became the word that was what this innovation lab was about. And so as we were doing recruiting for this year, we really didn't encourage that it's not about necessarily self-pacing, it's about taking ownership of learning. That we said we don't want students who are perfect. You don't have to all of a sudden be able to tell us what your post-high school plans are. You don't have to be perfect, you have to be coachable. You have to be somebody who, when we're working on your skills, your organization, your content, you're somebody who is going to respond to that. And again, that came from coaching experience, just as a varsity head coach, people who are willing to be impacted by others. And so that's how we kind of changed how we spoke to people in the recruitment process. Not that you have to be a top-level student. We love having students across the range. We want to try to match the Sycamore High School. And so I don't think that there is you don't have to be a STEM student. You don't have to be an outgoing student. That we really think the program can be for a diverse group of students. Where we find difficulty is when we work with kids to build those skills and they're not responding. Okay, hey buddy, here's an organizational plan. Let's make a plan. Let's execute it. I'm going to check on you in 30 minutes. Okay. And if that response does not happen over time, just like in a traditional classroom, that'd be very difficult. But because our space requires just a little bit more ownership, I think that's the part the students. But other academic profile type of student, anything like that, I think that is what we've discovered.
So as part of the summary of the data for some of our success measures, we see that students are performing at the same level on AIR and ACT as their peers according to the model match data. We see that our Synovation Lab students are taking a few more courses in comparison to their peers, again, because of that flexibility within the Synovation Lab schedule. We know that they are satisfied with their educational experience. Our retention rates tell us that as we compare it from year 1 until now, moving into year 3. And then we also see that the average GPA for this Innovation Lab student is higher than the class average, and that's due to that mastery-based grading and standards-based grading approach.
It's also important to point out, go back one slide, that we may say, well, if this is such a great program, why aren't they performing better? We have to go back and say, this is a startup. We're 3 years in. Our goal is that they do better. We've made many course corrections. One of them is building those executive functioning skills as they walk in. So we're not backtracking towards the end of first semester. So I think you're going to see that improvement over time. This class is the first class that entered into that innovation lab. So in a startup, if you're 3 years in and you are holding water, that's a pretty good sign in business. And then there's an uptick. And I think that's going to happen. I would say a full cycle of 4 years, 5 years, we should start seeing somewhat of an uptick. But you also have to realize that some of these kids were disengaged in the educational practice. Now they're engaged. So it's hard to say black and white data when we're talking about people and kids. And you take a disengaged kid in the junior high and they come into the high school and now we're teaching them executive functioning skills, and they own their own education, and now they blossom. No data point can give them, but our own experience and qualitative data can show that. That's why dissertations are sometimes qualitative and sometimes quantitative. And I think that's important to keep in mind on how many people have we saved in this process.
And I think to just move right into the part of the lab that we're so proud of. We're proud of our results of what we're sharing with you now, but this is the really great stuff that we're really excited to talk about.
And so earlier we had talked about how this Innovation Lab is similar to the traditional school. This is how this Innovation Lab is just a little bit different. You'll see these are all tweets from the Innovation Lab account or my account or Mr. Reardon's account, just of pictures and activities and things like that. Obviously, I'm not going to narrate those. On that list, a number of those items, you probably know what looping is, where you're sticking with one teacher a couple years in a row, right? And so on August day 1, obviously we know our students. That's part of the community. What was really cool entering year 2 is getting a hug from a student on day 1. Normally get it on the last day of school, but knowing who the student is, what their skills are, that was an awesome, unique opportunity. We're a very interdisciplinary team, which means that these skills, these college and career readiness that we talk about aren't happening by one isolated great teacher. And I think we've all had great teachers who really build into us individual in their classroom. Well, we're doing this as a team. We're talking about what are these skills, what's the common language that the students should hear in this learning space. You see up there SYNC, that's we kind of create an internal leadership model for our students to give them leadership models inside an academic environment. Student-led conferences in August, January, and May. We meet individually with the students and their families to talk reflection. How are things going? What are your goals for the year? What are you scared about? Really trying to give voice and practice for students to speak publicly. You'll see a number of pictures up there of students getting a chance to present in front of a live audience. You'll see them getting feedback from community members. Some of you have come in for some of our PBL events where they have to present their ideas in a public fashion and get feedback. We've taken them to Miami University, to just this last year, UC. We have a partnership with my University Western program. We have internship things that we're setting up with Kroger Tech. And so there's a big focus on not only what are the academic skills that you need to be successful, but what are these other skills, the ownership, the leadership, the communication, the teamwork that are going to make you successful afterwards. And I think that's some of the unique stuff that is very purposeful about our program. And so in order to kind of track that, since this is unique of what we do in our program compared to what happens for Sycamore High School at large, we've gotten a lot better at collecting data. And again, this year I was department supervisor, so this was part of my job, is to collect data about how things are going. And so these are 2 surveys. It took us a while to find good questions about what we were looking for. So this is the same questions in February and July. Do I learn deeply? Do I execute my plan? Do I attempt my projects? Am I organized? And am I working at a pace that's determined by my academic ability? And that question really is, if you're super, super smart and going super slow, I would say that there's a disconnect between your academic ability and the pace you're working. And so one of the things you can see in the trend data there is that for the most part, the students believe that they had gotten better in those skills from February till July, right? And again, that's the purpose of that data. You'll notice red is kind of a neutral, yellow is that it's a weakness, and you'll see that the weakness numbers are pretty small. On the next slide, there we go. Again, these are just skills. Do I communicate? Am I taking advantage of leadership? Am I participating in community building? Am I working on skills for the future? These questions were not only to get them to reflect on their own practice, but also to consistently call out, these are things we want from you, right? We started having the students write tri-weekly emails to their parents, giving a summary of their learning, goals, what they're doing, trying to increase communication at home. They would copy all their teachers and their counselors so that they were building a community of support. Taking advantage of leadership opportunities, you notice that that's low, right, as far as what we would want. And so this year, again, before the world changed, we were creating even more. We have a series of teacher teams trying to create more leadership in structure. So that's something that we obviously need to work on. But again, this is in a classroom, right? Creating leadership opportunities in a classroom. That's very unique to something we're trying to do. Community building, again, we do a ton of stuff there, and then that long-term life skills. As far as how we've changed, this data shows, again, aspects of our program, and this is by both parents and students. You can see mastery-based grading comes off very popularly. Self-pacing, less so, right? The idea that I have to plan my own day, and that kind of works into some of the incompletes. As a result of that, this year for our freshmen and sophomores, we're scheduling all of them in third bell and fourth bell to create more structure for them, right? So if you are in this innovation lab for 4 bells, for your 4 core subjects, you're going to have face-to-face teacher meetings for 2 of those bells, and you're going to have time for you to plan and organize and take ownership of your learning for 2 bells. So again, one of the things we learned is we needed to provide more support, so self-pacing. Project-based learning, we had a standalone elective. To be honest with you, that there wasn't one teacher who was super in charge of that, who had an opportunity to dig into that. We didn't have the support to make that happen. And so this year, what we decided is we're going to embed more PBL into the courses themselves. So it won't be necessarily a standalone elective that every student be required, but again, meaningful learning opportunities in our core curriculum classes. Obviously, student ownership of learning, they've appreciated that. When you talk to our students, that's one of the things that will come out, is that it's very difficult to be responsible for your grades. And then I'm not just somebody who's going to class every day, but I'm responsible for what I do. The one I'm most proud of is the Building Lifelong Learners. The idea that they understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're gaining skills that will carry them past high school, and I think that's what I'm most proud of.
So can I just clarify on that slide, as well as the other 2 called engagement/skills? These are surveys that students are taking, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, to clarify, when we say that they're going to come in third and fourth bell, it does not mean they're going to come in and sit in a traditional classroom, teacher in front, kids doing it. It just means we're going to be together so that we can guide the process better.
So as an example, last year in government, because the students weren't scheduled to a specific government class, I would have to hold ad hoc groups based upon the randomness of their schedule. This year, they will all be assigned to Bell, so I can more easily have class discussions. There's a lot to talk about current event-wise last year, and so it would have been beneficial to have that. It'll help with our science labs, getting them in front of their math teachers on a regular basis, and building that community. So.
And I would say that just from what Mr. Cole said in talking about what did we change and why, I think the really great things that we have learned is that I have seen a group of teachers come together of having to be the sage on the stage in their own classroom to being a collaborative team and modeling that, a high-functioning team that makes really tough decisions at an individual level for students as well as an entire program. So to me, that's one really big thing that we've learned, is that we as a team have to function at such a higher level, so that way we're modeling that for students. Another thing that I think that's really great as a celebration of this program is that students, when they are challenged, they will rise, and they will rise to things that I would never have imagined them to do before. And the amount of opportunity that our students just go and seek on their own because they have that flexibility within their day, it's been really remarkable. And then I think to one of the questions that was asked earlier about just what kind of student is best fit for this lab, and I think that what Mr. Cole said was perfect, that we want every student to be part of this lab, or anybody to come and take this opportunity, but it's the students who are really willing to take those risks, to assess who they are as a learner. And I think that that's another piece of the component, that as long as we're continuing to practice and model those things in the lab, we'll continue to celebrate those successes.
Okay, this is what is the big elephant in the room, the financial aspect and the cost of the lab. You know, one of the charges that we always hear is fiscally sound practices. So let's take a look at what the lab actually cost. So at the beginning, if you can recall, or to bring everybody up to speed, when we presented to the board, our initial vision was to take the upper locker bay, blow it out, and build this innovation lab there. Doing a building tour with Mr. Lewis, he just said that's going to cost way too much money. So we looked at blowing out 4 classrooms, knocking down the walls. Then we were taking a walk one day, and we walked into the little theater. It was black. We used the little theater about 4 times a year. It was an underutilized space in that building. So with some creativity and with SHP, They said, you know what, we can renovate this at a pretty minimum cost. It was about $250,000, including furniture. And you say, well, that's a lot for a space. However, it's not just the Innovation Lab space. It's a multi-use facility that we use all the time. We use it after school for events. We use it for faculty meetings. We use it for breakout groups. After school, we have groups going in there of kids that are in clubs. Esports has used it. So it's not just the $250,000 for this Innovation Lab. It really did enhance the building and give us another opportunity to expand our space because we need those large group spaces. Curricular pay, $30,000 to digitize the content, professional development, also explore other areas. That $30,000 was not just for the teachers in this Innovation Lab. The multitude of tangents that we've had come out of the Innovation Lab is remarkable. We have traditional teachers in the classroom that are collaborating with this Innovation Lab saying, how can I do this standard-based grading? How can I do this mastery learning? And those practices are going everywhere in the building. Then we hit the pandemic. This Innovation Lab's ready because they had digitized content and they could go. So we're utilizing their expertise in what we're doing now in a pandemic situation in the virtual classroom, and if by chance we have to go remote. Is it a complete equal? No. But we're using their expertise on how did you do that? What are you doing differently? That we can engage these students. Staff allocations, we did not add new staff. If I worked at P&G in the research and development department, they would say, I want you to be innovative, but don't spend any more money. Well, that's a huge step for us, that we were able to do this without any additional staff. We allocate staff a little differently now in terms of duties maybe and those type of things. Was it a good investment? One thing I can tell you, some of the cost savings is, anytime a teacher's out, we don't have to get a sub for them because we have coverage inside of that lab. We know that we are a hub of innovation. We've had almost 900 visitors to the space. We've probably had 70 districts into the space. We have international connections. I can tell you that in my spare time, my off time, my vacation days, I'm part of a team that is building an international school in Romania under the concept of this Innovation Lab. The whole school district. It'll be 7 through 12. Same concept, same kind of facility, so that students own that process. We have tangents coming out. There's one in Mayfield. Mason is looking at developing one. Lakota's looking at developing one. So it's not just, we're Sycamore, we're going to do something different. This truly is what is in best interest for some of our students.
I have a question. I'm interested in two things. The digitizing of the curriculum. I would be interested in seeing what that looks like. And I'd also like to know if you've aligned that with national standards for online curriculum.
It is aligned to the core. It's aligned to Ohio standards. It is the same expectations in that lab that it is in the traditional setting. And we would be thrilled to show Ms. Weiss anything that we have.
Yeah, I would just be interested to see what it looks like. The other question I have about Schoology is I'm trying to understand as I sit here on the board now, and this is my 5th year, and having a couple students, one who graduated and one who's in school now. Can you explain to me the differences between Blackboard, Google Classroom, and Schoology, and why we are using what seems to me to be 3 different platforms? Why would we use something different in this Innovation Lab while we have 2 which I think are pretty well used, well tested systems?
I'll let the
Yeah.
experts discuss that.
It's a great question. One of the benefits that Schoology gives us is, number one, it does the mastery-based grading scale in there. The ability to do rubrics that go straight to the grade. I'm launching content, my grade book, everything's aligned. Whereas really, Blackboard from the parent user perspective is you're seeing the grade, but on the back end, we are launching assessments, grading in separate platforms. So Schoology has all of those all in one with the mastery based. And so obviously Blackboard does a whole bunch of other things, and I'm not the technology expert. I would defer to Mr. Fritz on exactly what he sees as the benefits or not benefits. But I know that for us, the ability to do mastery based grading and then having all of those systems aligned in one.
So I guess from like a financial perspective, as sitting here as a board member, that sounds wonderful for the teacher, and you explained that very well. But from my perspective, I'm starting to think, well, now I have an IT department that is going to have to support not one, not two, but 3 different systems. That's going to be expensive. I mean, so the ripple effect could be more. And I'm wondering if there should be a more systematic approach at a district level to actually assess those things and move forward with one that everyone can use, opposed to saying, well, this group of students, for Innovation Lab, for the 160 students and teachers, this is a better model. But for, our K through 4, Blackboard is really great. And then when we get into, the middle school or the traditional environment at the high school, Google Classroom is really good. So having all those different systems that people are expected to use and we're expected to maintain financially through our IT department. And Mr. Fritz, I don't know if I'm talking about you without you actually saying anything, but those are the kinds of things that I worry about, where we have these new things, and Schoology sounds great, but is it the newest and latest and greatest thing, and is it only sort of a fit for what you guys are doing in Innovation Lab, but it really can't be translated into the K through 4 grade levels, et cetera?
And I don't disagree with you. And I know Mr. Fritz and Ms. Wagner have had discussions about analyzing what our learning management system is. And I know when Mr. Fritz gets frustrated with us because we go and get something and he says, has that been vetted?
Yeah, it's
Are
a great
you sure
question.
It's been vetted?
Sure.
Okay. Well, now, if, let's say, the district sits down and analyzes, okay, what's our best LMS? Well, we have a program that is vetting Schoology, and that's a possibility. But I don't disagree with you that we do need to sit down and really look at our
Mrs. Wagner,
platforms.
Mrs. Wagner, you were raising your hand back there. Do you want to say something? Oh.
Yeah, Mrs. Weiss, thank you for asking that question. I just wanted, when you talked about the district perspective, to let you know that Mr. Fritz and I have been in conversation about that exact same thing. Looking at the fragmentation that currently exists, and our plan is to get a consistent LMS for the entire district, and so Schoology is being piloted right now via the Innovation Lab. There are other similar LMS systems that we would investigate as well. Our plan was to start that work this upcoming school year. We worked on the data dashboard component last year and using that same model to move forward. And again, with teacher input, sharing what these folks have learned, that whole collaborative process. That was our plan, and then, COVID. So we'll see what that looks like moving forward, but we agree with you 100% on that. And that is a goal of ours, to get that consistency, to make sure it has all the components that all of our teachers are going to need. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Fritz, do you have anything you want to add as the IT? Okay, thank you. Thanks.
As far as next steps, again, the collection of data was very helpful. And the match process, I had not been exposed to that. And again, luckily I had an opportunity to do that this summer, but also there was a lot of academic work that I had to read about quasi-experimental research and how to effectively do that. So I would love help if anybody on the board or in central office could help refine our current match group for this current class, and then find a way to do that going forward. The back-end system that Steve and I created will really allow us to compare now 2 groups of students across multiple different types of assessments. And so I think that the tool we created itself could be useful. So I do want to continue to collect both the qualitative and the quantitative data. We are going to continue to engage our community. Over the last couple weeks, you can imagine how many parent meetings and student meetings we've held, virtual town halls, maybe 8 already, with another 2 to 4 where we're engaging with our community and finding out what are their needs, what are their concerns. And so we're going to continue to do that, building parent support groups, parent committees to help support us, as well as our teacher committees that we've created internally to try to make that work. We are expanding our network. Had an email last night from somebody at Xavier who wanted to connect with us. Again, we're working Kroger Tech. We're meeting every other week to talk about internships, so connecting not only colleges and businesses, but Dr. Warren and I are working on a way to share some of our process and philosophy out with the larger world. We think it'll be funny and educational, hopefully. We know that we need to build a vibrant website to share some of that stuff. And so we know there's a lot of work, and as department supervisor, a lot of that will fall on me as far as making connections. We've started working with some of the teachers at the junior high. I've emailed a couple of them to see any collaboration we can have. We've worked a lot with the Purple team here at the Green School, and so trying to go vertical and then obviously horizontal with some of the teachers at our high school. So also expanding our work. So that's some of our next steps.
We will continue to do site visits as well. Those will look very different, clearly, as we will figure out the best virtual way to host those. But additionally, we are going to work on this year providing some type of framework for professional development. So then that way other teachers can come and get that expertise from other districts, from our experts in this innovation lab. Yellow Springs offers a model that's very similar to that, where teachers will come and pay a certain amount of money. Some of that money then will go into this innovation lab for resources. For our vision for 2025, we are, again, looking at our current data, as Mr. Colt said, and a lot of that data is going to help drive decisions about targeting specific curriculum, content skills to improve AIR scores, as well as to continue embedding ACT strategies to enhance the ACT scores. We are using a college model now. It took us a couple years to figure out what model was going to best fit with that flexibility that our students were wanting in that space. So now we are implementing that this year. We'll collect data on how the students, their achievement is, to kind of figure out if that's the timely completion that's going to make for them for those courses. Micro-credentialing will be a big component this year. We have developed a couple different subcommittees within this innovation lab, and one of those is a PBL committee which will take on this micro-credentialing program. We want to start to assess how students are growing in their executive functioning skills, as well as in those impact skills. We realize that surveys can only do so much. So with Schoology, there is actually a component of that platform that will allow us to give badges, to assign badges, as students earn specific milestones within what we would consider our executive functioning curriculum and or our impact skill curriculum. Some of those things will be embedded within courses. Some of them lend themselves to be better in courses, such as communication within English, as that's part of their standards. So that will be a big part of our work this year. Anything you want to add?
Also, if you look at the executive functioning skills in the vision of this innovation lab, we have a team of teachers led by Esther Adams that are looking at those executive functioning skills and how do we make sure that the traditional setting is getting that same impact. So that's a carryover. Another thing that we talked to the board about, what's the future after the 4 years in this innovation lab? What's going to happen? And we're going to look at a mini version of this innovation lab where you may only do this innovation lab concept in math and science, or English and social studies. So almost like a part-time thing. And it's a great time. We're in a master facility plan. Our high school is going to be remarkable. And we have some room in each department where we do have a general purpose classroom that spills out into a collaborative space. So I think we can be very creative in how we use our newly remodeled building. So the final thing I would say is, was the money well spent? 100%. 100%. Because not only is it really good for kids, it is really good for the teachers in that building to look at a way to do education differently. It's also really good money spent because people are looking at Sycamore as the leaders of innovation. Is it best for kids? 100%. We have saved a lot of kids in this program.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for the presentation. Does anyone on the board have any questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. I saved them for the end. So this is really important work, and I appreciate this presentation today and your engagement in the data and looking at it. And, particularly love about Innovation Lab is stepping back and saying, what's the objective of what we're doing as educators, and asking that question, that we want to really teach them to be lifelong learners, because once they learn to, or love to learn, then all things are possible. So conceptually love that. So I obviously have some data questions that I want to ask as well. So thinking about class of 2021, which is what we started with, and this is an important year for them as they're heading into their senior year. First question, we talk about college and career readiness, because ultimately it's our goal to prepare them for what they want to do at the next point in their life. Do we have an understanding of what that split is between our Innovation Lab students from the class of 2021 that are going to apply for college or are going career route or something else?
I think that'd be great data to collect and then continue to follow that forward. I think for me personally, it'd be very important. I know on the ODE website they collect how many people go to college and how many graduate within 6 years. Again, my call is a grade 26-year-old, and so for me, that's the data. Right now, I don't have a breakdown of intentional citations.
And that's not only good data for the Innovation Lab, that's really good data for traditional, because we do need to kind of look at, okay, what are the paths? Sometimes at the beginning of senior year, you're probably going to have about 60% of the kids go, yeah, I'm going to go to college, and then you have, I have no idea. So I think it's the timing of when do we reach out and really collect that data on what their path is.
Right. And I think, this year obviously is kind of a year that they have to be ready for that. So that'll be good, and to continue that on. But I remember that when we had the concept originally, the idea was that we were going to have it mirror kind of the same demographic, the same kind of traditional environment. Our current split for college and career readiness is 85-15. And is that just, without collecting the data, is that kind of your feel for the kids that are in there, like 85% are going? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
And actually, hopefully, I'll be honest with you, that with our personalized conversations we're having with them, that maybe some of them will maybe choose college, maybe not, but it's the right choice for them. And so my hope is that their freshman retention rate is higher because we've had those conversations. My lunch yesterday that I had with a student, he wanted to go play baseball in college merely because he wanted to be a hitting coach one day. So we started talking about, okay, well, what are you going to major in? He has no idea. He doesn't really have a college plan, but it was a vision he had. So that's just a one-on-one conversation that, again, whether they choose college or not, for me, it's about them finding that right path.
So it will be part of your plan to incorporate matriculation data and continue to follow these kids into their careers, and if it's career path as well. Okay, that's great. When we designed this, I know that we talked about the air test, and that it's taken a couple different times. I'm curious with the data and results you presented, if that was all taken at the same time as the traditional environment. So is it the spring test, or did you use the retakes that are available?
I believe we were only able to do the original spring test. Steve and I'd have to look at that spreadsheet again, but that was something that we had to take into consideration about the students who took the second time. I believe for the most part it was just that spring test. I don't know if we were able to figure out how to take into account the second taking the assessment. So I'd love we can sit down.
And then my last two-part question is, I know there's always hiccups with data, and you shared a couple of those. But when you look at it, and the percentage of the students, did you look at how many of the students really didn't match their model group? And did you get a feel for like what that split is as a percentage?
You mean as far as how many students, when I say meet their match group on the
Yeah.
right term?
Yeah.
And so I think on one of the spreadsheets that we shared, and if not, I can share that with you.
Okay, I
It has
don't
those
have that.
percentages down there. It was just more than half or just under half. So again, I even compared the mean, the range, and all that other stuff. So on Some of them were massive for some students, like on the air test average score, and some of them were super aligned. So the data really was all over the place, and that's where, breaking it down, when you talk about progress of the program, I would say, for me, the aggregate data is good, but it's really the individualized, personalized data that I appreciate more is how does student number 12 compare to their match group? As soon as we get that solid match group and take into account changes in family structure and things like that, like what is it that affects a student's achievement that we can impact, and then what can we do in the classroom to increase that achievement over the program?
So then my second part follow up on that is because hearing you that it's really about the individual student and how they're doing with these peers that they were tracking with as they came in. If they're not doing as well, and it's somebody that's considering a college path, is that information that we as a district share with the student, as they may be interested in knowing, maybe it's not, or vice versa. Do we share with the traditional group that, hey, this is the kind of results we have, is that, you're a candidate for this, that helps in marketing a program on the flip side. But I know you always learners are different types and you want to get them in the right environment. This is an opportunity now because you have this data. If the data is good, you got to make sure that that's sound. But to either coach people out or coach people in to the right fit.
Well, I think the big point there is the innovative practices here at the Green School. When those kids come up, I think we're going to see a huge influx into this innovation lab because in their PBL teams, they're developing those executive functioning skills, and we continue to work on how do we embed those skills inside the traditional setting. So I think you're going to see a huge difference as our new learners come into the high school.
And one thing I'd follow, I give a ton of credit to our teachers and the board administrators, but also to the students who signed up in year one, because Sycamore does so many great things. I'm a graduate, all my brothers are, my kids go, and so Sycamore's traditional education has been really great. And so to say this is a really great product, why would I try something new? I think I have a ton of respect for those first year students who did that, especially with our growing pains. I think that as we continue through the years and our product becomes more sound and known, I think it'll be easier to help students identify, do you need more structure and support? Are you interested in taking more advantage, or do you need that path? And I think the marketing will help. Really, we've only gone through this is our third marketing cycle, so yeah.
I agree with you, but if it isn't working for some students, I would hope that we're making sure that that's not where they are.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that the Innovation Lab team does really well is student-led conferences, and they coach them very well, and they're very transparent, and they use Slack, and all the notes are in there, and if it's not a good fit for them, then we transition them back into the traditional setting, thus the retention rate.
Very good. Well, thank you.
I wanted to offer my thanks as well for the presentation. I greatly appreciate it. So thank you, Mr. Mader, Mr. Cole, Mrs. Warren. I really appreciated specifically the success criteria, a part of the presentation where we had a model match comparison. For me, that's super important to see, are we succeeding in this? My question is on a capacity constraint, and your comments, Mr. Mader, underscored it. From a supply and demand standpoint, we have a physical constraint within the size of the room that you have now to work. Is there more demand than supply? Are we pushing people away from the Innovation Lab? And if we expect increased demand in the future, what are your thoughts on how to serve that increased demand?
So that's the uniqueness of the new master facility plan. So we're going to have room to look at exploring those expansions. We will outgrow that space, but we do know that we're going to add a little bit just in the remodel because the Spirit Shop's moving up into the new athletic area. At least that's the rough draft. So we can push in a little bit into that area, So when we get after this coming year, then we'll analyze, do we expand this innovation lab holistically, or do we take a step into that part-time piece and then look at that in a couple years to expand it? And it depends, what's that next group coming in?
What's our percentage? Is it usually about twice as many? Is usually where it is. I mean, just to answer your question.
So we have about twice as much demand as we have capacity in our current space. And in the construction plans that we have, is that being addressed?
Yes and no. We have traditional classrooms, but we have collaborative spaces throughout. We do have some room to expand into individual classrooms. We will get really creative to where we could even expand the capacity of our Innovation Lab and then push into some classrooms. That's what they ask for a lot, is some private rooms, and we keep telling them we only have so much real estate. But in that twice as many apply than are accepted, you also have to go back to Mr. Mercurio's point, are they a good fit? And they may not be a good fit now, but they may be a good fit in the future. And then we also take a step back. What can we do as a district to build those executive functioning skills earlier so that whoever applies is a good fit?
Yeah, and you've talked before about coaching people in and coaching people out. I think it's really great. I really want to, my final question is just, I'll recap with, I really appreciate what you're doing and the leadership that's been provided here for our district. My final question is a relatively easy one, but what does help look like?
What does what?
Help look like?
Okay, well, when you're dealing with personalization, it's people. I think in the future we asked originally about academic coaches. I think we really need to explore that because we want our instructors to be curriculum experts and intervention experts, and that piece of pacing and coaching students along is a really tough piece with those teachers doing individual intervention, doing individual digitization of the content, and some they're pulling up, some they're enhancing their skills. So that's a huge piece that these guys have struggled with, and that's the help piece.
Another piece, our visions are pretty large, right? We've started a makerspace in partnership with Kroger Tech. We have students who were in our neighborhood last night creating videos. I see the possibility of this just being really a hub of student-directed innovation. And so we're working on grants and partnerships and stuff like that just to expand even that creative aspect and the relationships that we have with all the regional areas. So connections, if you guys have connections to companies that we can partnership, unique individual people who come in. The best man at my wedding happens to work in election security. So he came in and talked to our students last year, trying to bring in those individual speakers who can share, this is what my job really looks like. If you say you want to go into business, this is what my little piece of that world looks like. And I think those authentic experiences are hugely important. So any resources that you have where people can put us in connection with would be very much appreciated.
And I would echo that. I think just your presence in the lab and coming in and seeing what we're about so you can speak from that personal component when community members are coming to you and asking questions. I think that there's a difference when you're in that space and you're seeing what students are doing in real time. One of the things that I have loved the most is having Shadow a Student Day, where their parents come in and sit next to them and they literally do exactly what their kid is doing at school the whole day. So they see it all and they do it all. And we have had nothing but positive feedback from that. So I think just asking you to come in and look at what we've done, give us feedback, we would love that too.
And one tangent from that, there was a dad who was shadowing his son. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you, when I came in here, I thought all they did was play all day. He goes, I'm just blown away of the responsibility that each one of these kids take. And that's the same comments we get from every visitor that comes in. When a school system signs up to come visit the lab, no adult is involved. They have developed a leadership committee and a communication committee that they just put an appointment in my calendar. Mr. Mater, you need to be here to meet these people. And they greet them. So those executive functioning skills are tremendous. We had a Skype call with a school up in Cleveland, and they did a Cinovation Lab just for their seniors. So there was a group of seniors talking to freshmen and sophomores, and one of the kids in Cleveland said, "What grade are you guys all in?" "Freshman." "I'm a freshman." "Oh my gosh, you act older than we are." So those are the skill sets that really you can't measure until you're actually sitting in the lab.
Thank you.
Grateful for the questions from the board. Thank you. Any others? Mr. Mader, Dr. Warren, Mr. Cole, thank you. I'm very grateful for everything you do and your leadership with our amazing students and staff in this Innovation Lab. So job well done. Thank you for doing everything.
All right, Mr. Forstoffel, change of date for the class of 2021 graduation.
Yeah, this is great news, and I want to thank Mr. Mader, who did a lot of the behind-the-scenes work to secure our spot at the Cintas Center for May 30th, 2021, for the class of 21 at 11 a.m.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I need a motion for the approval of the contract with Kid Power Therapy Services Incorporated.
So moved.
Second?
This is an agreement with Kid Power to provide speech, language, and occupational therapy services for a student with a disability per their effective IEP for the coming school year. And the estimated amount is listed in the agenda.
Any questions from the board? Mrs. Oh.
See, Mr. Okay. Are we ready? Okay, I'm just making sure that we'll be able to see Mr. Evans when we're ready for the vote.
Okay, thank you. There he is.
There he is.
All right, Mrs. David, do you have any questions?
Are we ready?
I think you said no.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mr. Mercurio,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mr. Evans. You have to give us a thumbs up. And Mrs. Weiss.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the contract with On-Time Medi Transport.
So moved.
Seconded.
This is an agreement with On-Time Medi Transport. As we've shared with the board before, we have a few of our students that have very specific needs. Sometimes they're behavioral, sometimes they're medical, that really requires us to find alternative transportation for them and specialized transportation. So we've worked with this organization. They do a nice job for us. Currently, we are scheduled to provide 21 students as of now with this specialized transportation. Please note that this is done when it is dictated per the student's IEP as specialized transportation. And that is determined by the IEP team with consultation from members of our transportation department.
Any questions from the board?
Mrs. Weber, how does this compare to previous years? Similar amount or increase?
I'm sorry.
Comparison to similar years in amount.
Comparison what?
In amount, similar.
To last year, one of the things that it's going to be significantly higher than last year only because we had no transportation costs in fourth quarter of last year. But looking at it from a quarter to quarter basis, it's fairly similar.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Weber, please call the vote.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mr. Mercurio,
Aye.
Mr. Evans, Aye. Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the amendment to the lease agreement with Ben Tom Properties LLC.
So moved.
Second.
This is an amended agreement to provide us and our virtual classroom teachers what we think will be really good space for them to conduct their virtual classroom with our 1,984 students. I sent this to the board in a visual so you can kind of see where this is at. It's kind of the middle section of a property up on Kenwood Road. The back half of that we already utilized for Aves Academy. Interestingly enough, that this space, when we were transitioning Aves Academy into their permanent space, we utilized some of this space in their transition. So we're familiar with this space. We think it's uniquely suited for what we want to do with our virtual classroom. I want to thank Mr. Lewis for his dogged work to get this done, and to Mr. Fritz, who did an exhaustive analysis of what we need from a technology standpoint to make sure this works out really, really well. So we think this is a great opportunity for us. It gives us an opportunity to provide what we believe is an important support for our virtual classroom teachers in a space that we think is conducive for what they need to do.
Any questions from the board?
And is this for authorization for the entire year?
It's for the year.
It's for the year.
For the entire year, yes.
Yeah, I just appreciate the creative thinking, and I appreciate that all the work and heavy lifting that you and your team are going through right now to make something like this happen. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forstoffel. Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mr. Mercurio,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
and Mr. Evans.
Motion approved. I need a motion for the approval of the contract with Behavioral Intervention and Consulting.
So moved?
Second.
This is a contract with the company listed for consulting services, which would include behavioral collaboration with our teams for students with disability beginning August 1 and going through the remainder of the school year.
Any questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Evans, and Mr. Mercurio.
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Forstoffel,
I do not have any other.
not one thing? Okay.
We got a lot going
I
on.
know, you
so-
do have a lot going on. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to the treasurer's agenda. I need a motion for the approval of board policy approval regarding EBEA use of face coverings.
So moved?
Second.
I have a, in light of Governor DeWine's, I don't know if it's a directive that he gave yesterday regarding face coverings for K through 12 students, and in looking at our policy, I want to make sure that we are aligned with the policy or the directive that Governor DeWine gave. In particular, the third bullet in our exceptions, the student, and I'll read it out loud, the student is in a so this is basically exceptions. The face covering requirement does not apply to the following situations. The student is in a well-ventilated classroom in which all students are able to maintain at least 6 feet of physical distance during instruction. I would propose that we strike that bullet from the policy.
Okay. What I would ask would be for those of you who have made the motion and seconded that motion, is if you would be in favor of agreeing with that change that Mrs. Weiss has proposed. And if so, we can just maintain the motion and second that originally occurred.
I'm in favor of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, fine.
makes sense.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from the board?
Have we had, Mrs. Weber, have you had the opportunity to review the rest of it in alignment with what the governor said yesterday to make sure we're in alignment?
We did look at it in regards to that, and also looked at one of the things that you're not approving today, but that we provided to you yesterday were the waiver forms that will be sent to families and staff members, and also made sure that those were aligned with what the governor had said, as well as really adding a provision in both of those agreements or both of those waivers that it could be subject to change based on something like what occurred yesterday with the governor, so that those who are responding to that request do know that it is subject to change and could become, in this case, our policy was for the most part aligned with the governor's in that he had been less restrictive for students in the past, than what we had been. So that worked out okay, other than the difference with the physical distancing. We just want people to be aware that something may occur that would make it more stringent than what they had initially responded to based on future public directives. So,
Yeah, and we were ahead of the curve actually in this, and had made decisions that were aligned with what the governor said yesterday already. We were already there. I would also offer that what we'll need to do is, based on the change that was just made, we'll need to strike that from the facial covering waiver for student as well.
Okay. And the reason, the reason or my thought process behind striking that is, it is not just having physical distance. It is recommended that is physical distance in addition to mask wearing and hand washing. And Governor DeWine specifically says that in his directive. So I just want to make sure that we are covering that.
No, you're absolutely right, Mrs. Weiss. And as we began to put this plan together, remember I used the terms physical distancing and masking that's coupled together.
Yes.
And the hand washing, obviously.
Right. Thank you so much. Okay, Mrs. Weber, can you please call the vote on the amended policy?
Mr. Ballant?
Aye.
Mr. Comerford?
Aye.
Mr. Evans? Mr. Mercurio?
Aye.
And Mrs. Weiss.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the personnel consent agenda, including items 1E, F, and 4F that were on the addendum.
So moved. Seconded?
And Mrs. Weber, I believe we have a small modification to something in the personnel consent agenda.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Mr. Lewis found a discrepancy on the personnel consent agenda from what we need to have approved. So I've asked him if he could explain that. And then similarly to the last motion, I'll ask Mr. Mercurio and Mr. Ballant whether they are in approval of the change to the personnel consent agenda.
It's just a minor change. The approval of Charles Bishop, he was a child nutrition server. The job listed for him is wrong that he's currently in, but he will be transferring to the delivery driver for a 4-hour position. So there's just a minor change there.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I'm accepting of the change.
I'm as well.
Okay. Mrs. Weber, can you please call the roll with the modification?
Mr. Mercurio?
Aye.
Mr. Ballant?
Aye.
Mr. Comerford?
Aye.
Mr. Evans? And Mrs. Weiss.
Aye, motion passes. On to other Board of Education business. I need a motion for the employment of Mrs. Beth Weber as treasurer.
So moved.
Seconded?
So, Mrs. Weber, I have the privilege of being the first person to submit some comments for the public record regarding the employment of you, rehiring of you as treasurer. I first would like to express my thanks to you for your exemplary service to Sycamore Community Schools. As treasurer, your talents and skills are applied to a variety of areas within our district, including budget processing, financial planning and analysis, accounting, and managing staff. But you are not only a treasurer in our district, you are also recognized as a leader and are looked to for guidance and direction on a multitude of issues. You lend your talents to various areas in Sycamore, including human resources, relationships with both of our unions, and legislative positions of the district. You have also been recognized as a leader in the state of Ohio. The Ohio Association of School Business Officials has recognized you with their highest award, the Virginia Ramsey Service Award, as well as the Regional Distinguished Service Award. Your department has received the Ohio Auditor of the State Award with distinction for multiple years. This is both a testament to your expertise in school finances and your management and leadership with your team. Under your direction, your department has been awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for an amazing 26 years. Mrs. Weber, you've also served on the Board of Trustees for the Butler Health Plan, and you are a leader in the Alliance for High Quality Education. I thank you for your leadership, thoughtful insights, informed decision-making, and always doing what is best for Sycamore, and I will be proud to vote yes to reemploy you as treasurer of Sycamore. I now open the floor to the board if anyone else has comments.
Yeah, I'll just say, Mrs. Weber, thank you. You wear many hats for the district, and with that, you've guided the district to making some fantastic decisions over the entire time I've lived here, which dates back to 2002, and I know that you were here even prior to that. But thank you so much for everything that you've done, your leadership within the district, within the state of Ohio, mentoring other treasurers. It's an honor to have you in Sycamore, and I can honestly say that in my time of being on the board that you have saved the districts, or at least contributed to creative solutions that have saved this district millions and millions of dollars. That's just a fact. That's just not a statement. And last, I just mentioned that we don't do a lot of rehires. I think we've only done a couple ever. And we only do it when it's an incredible value for the district. This certainly qualifies as an incredible value for the district. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just like to echo the comments. The leadership that you provide our district is outstanding in every single role that you do for this district. To say you're the treasurer is a complete understatement of really your roles and responsibilities. And I think it's really reflective of the leader you are when you look around the state, that other treasurers look to you for guidance and mentoring, but also the state legislators take what you say, they take what you say under consideration and very thoughtful. You can just reach out, you can just think back to the letter that you and Mr. Forstoffel wrote just this last spring, and because of that, some of the state funding was reversed, and Sycamore got some of our funding back. So I want to add my thanks. If you look at return on investment on any decision we make, this is a no-brainer to bring you back in a retirement rehire position. The investment that we make and continue to make in you, like Mr. Mercurio said, is really paying dividends to the district. Your financial leadership over the course of your entire career here has been outstanding, and the community really owes you a debt of gratitude, and I know the board does as well, so thank you.
At the risk of piling on, I am going to do so anyway because it's so well deserved. Beth, Mrs. Weber, thank you for your service to this district for all these years. I congratulate you on your retirement, but I am so pleased that you will continue to serve this district the way you have in the past. I've only worked with you for a few short months, but I see the difference that you make. And, I would say on top of everything that Melissa said and John said and Paul said, or Mrs. Weiss, Mr. Mercurio, and Mr. Ballant said, that your expertise in conducting the meetings and also the policies that I have had the privilege of starting with, the policy work, is over and above of what I would say most districts have from their treasurer. So I want to thank you personally for the policy collaboration that you've provided for me as I've been starting in that role. So thank you.
Mrs. Weiss, may I? I certainly will not repeat everything that the members of the board have said, but I will kind of harp on one thing that one of you mentioned, and that's really the unique role that Mrs. Weber plays in the district. I know that her role within the district is so unique to Sycamore in terms of how we leverage her leadership skills in and above her financial acumen. We know what that is, right? But she brings so much more to our team from a leadership perspective. And I like to say it like this, and I've told Beth this, that it's her perspective that really assists us in how we do our business here in the district. And we pride ourselves as a leadership team on encouraging different perspectives as we get to the right answers. And she's always, whether it be financial or not, it doesn't matter for us. And she's always willing and able and does that in such a great way that it causes us, in a good way, to think differently about things. And because of that, she's made us a better team. And, you know, certainly personally, Beth and I have had the opportunity as partners and what we've tried to do over the last many years. And it's been good to have her by my side and doing a lot of things, and just think of the community impact we've made as a district due to her leadership. So I applaud the board for this decision. It's the right one for the district and for this community.
Thank you, Mr. Forstoffel. Mr. Evans, did you want to say something?
Yeah, you probably gave me but you know, whoever thank you for all you keep doing, hoping to drive things forward. I know you've got some challenges laid out in front of us. You want to keep pushing through the district to make it better. Something to something else that I'll keep working to go forward to your leadership moving there. And financial issues.
All right, thank you. And with that, Mrs. Weber, can you please call the vote?
Well, I really was just expecting you to vote, but I hope, are we recording this meeting?
No, but I have notes. I'll give you
I
the sheet.
hope we are. Thank you. You know, I think I've shared with you on many occasions, you don't work somewhere, you know, even if you're just an employee in this kind of role, without feeling like it's your own, you know. It's one of those places where I've been able to do so much, and the district has given me so much back. You know, you've educated my kids, you've supported my family. I've met so many great friends and colleagues, and learned so much about myself, and been able to be in a place where I get all kinds of different experiences, and I'm allowed to grow. So all of those things that, you know, you really outlined about things that are contributions that I've made are ones that I have so much appreciated, and that they've made me, you know, just a better person, a better mom, a better spouse, because my husband's a teacher. All of those things this district has given back to me as well. So these next 2 years, they're going to be really challenging. We'll talk about whether we spend any more time together than that, but I will tell you that I have really appreciated all the time I'm in Sycamore, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity to continue here for a while. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber.
You're going to laugh, but I missed who seconded that motion. Was it Mr. Ballin or Mr. Mercurio?
You can pick.
Mr. Mercurio, okay. Hold on. Okay. Are you ready for the roll? Mr. Comerford?
Aye.
Mr. Mercurio?
Aye.
Mr. Evans? Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And Mr. Ballin?
Aye.
Motion passes. I need Mr. Forstoffel, strategic planning.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Yes, we had, as I've shared with you, our plan moving forward, understanding that we're about 90% complete. We continue to inch forward. We had what I thought was a very, very powerful and productive session. Mr. Mercurio is nodding his head, with the strategic planning team. We met last Friday. We reviewed our 3-year objectives and 1-year goals, and tried to look at how we prioritize those moving forward. We didn't get through all of them. We have some social and emotional learning under that theme to do as yet. So we got to keep working through that. That next meeting is coming up, I believe, next week, to kind of put a bow on that. We also want to take a look at our Portrait of a Graduate themes to make sure that we're in that position. So our hope would be is that when we conclude next week's meeting, we will then be in a position where we can bring it to the full board for review, and then we can talk then what's next about bringing it to the community in the fall. Ms. Mercurio, offer anything?
That's perfect. You just covered my notes.
Mr. Forstoffel, I'd just like to thank you and the entire strategic planning team for moving forward on that. in light of everything that is going on with our planning for the fall, it really is an amazing thing that you guys are moving forward on that, and I really appreciate it.
It was, actually, it was nice for a couple hours to talk about something other than physical distancing and masks and things like that. It was energizing for us. At least it was for me, anyway.
Okay, audit liaison update, Mr. Evans.
Yes, good morning. In talking with our treasurer, Mrs. Weber, there's audit coming up with the annual audit we have to take a year through the state's office, and that will be happening in the fall. And one of the questions that comes up every year is, do you want to go through a formal introduction to your cost center with the auditors, or would you like to forego the formal session with the board and allow the fund in and get periodic liaison and also more details to the treasurer, Mrs. Weber. In this year's discussion that has exchanged back and forth with the audit team, there are no new requirements or areas of focus for the audit team. They will be more than through and focusing on areas that they have audited in the past, with no new requirements that we expect. And the question in front of the board is whether or not we do a formal review with the board or allow an informal review or bypass review and let the process begin. My recommendation is that there are no new audit areas, that these are all audit areas that Mrs. Weber has been audited on before, received very high marks, that we allow the audit to begin without the formal exchange with the board. And that's open for questions to the board.
I'm completely fine with that as well.
I am too.
It's okay with me.
Yeah, I'm good with it. Mr. Evans, you'll continue to serve as the liaison to that process, though, correct?
I will let you know that they actually, I think, want to come in probably as soon as you give the go-ahead to forego the conference. That was an exciting development last week. Like, we're ready to come and see you. Like, yay. But anyway, I think they're actually going to do the audit virtually, so we won't have auditors on staff or on site. Ms. Neuner, the assistant treasurer, will be taking the lead on the audit process this year. So that's a great help.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is the board retreat in October. Just wanted to begin the conversation with the board, Mr. Forstoffel and Mrs. Weber, about topics for the board retreat.
Well, typically we utilize this to, with the building teams, to share previous year's data, achievement data. That's going to be problematic since we don't have that. We've traditionally tried to set this off as one kind of more focused on the academic endeavors that we're doing and looking at and what we've accomplished. And then we do the February one for financial kinds of issues. So I'm open to suggestions on what the board might be looking for. We'll try and tailor something that would be most appropriate. You know, I think we've done a good job of keeping you up to speed on our reopening plans, and by October, whatever that date is, we'll be full in or we'll be in the middle of that, so I don't think that that's relevant. So I'd be interested in knowing what the board might be interested in, and maybe you know, thinking about where we're at with the strategic planning, maybe we could leverage some of that work around that retreat as well. That might be an opportunity for us to consider utilizing some of that time, because that's really going to guide the district for the next 5 to 7 years. So maybe that's an opportunity.
From a curriculum standpoint, would there be any opportunity to engage the board a little bit more on what's going on in the virtual classrooms at that point?
Sure. Yeah, we could
It's
do
just
that.
a thought.
Yep.
Another thought is hopefully we'll have some additional data on our property property tax receipts and financial plans, and if we could even do some what if scenario planning for when we might need to go back to the community. I would really like to have some long-term thoughts and planning on that.
Mr. Comfort, I agree with you. If we could have a good few hours of the retreat focused on the financial aspects of the district, I think that would be helpful, especially in light of looking into additional costs that we're incurring because of COVID-19 planning, but also the long-term effect that they might have on our district. Mr. Mercurio, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I agree with Mrs. Weiss and Mr. Comerford. I think those what-if scenarios around financial planning is a good idea. Also think it wouldn't be bad to make some kind of assessment of where our kids are. I know that we will be taking map tests. We've talked about summer slide. We know that's a real thing. We know this year that it could be even more than that. So I think there's probably some things that we can incorporate with the approach around student model matches that we use with Innovation Lab that makes a lot of sense to make an assessment on how our different curriculum delivery models work.
Great. Okay, so Mr. Forstoffel, I think you and I can probably put an agenda together.
I think
for
we've
that.
got enough to.
All right, thank you. And our last piece of Board of Education business, I need a motion for the approval of the agreement for the due process case number 3652-2018.
So moved?
Seconded. Mrs. Weber, is there anything you would like to say about this?
Do you need comments on it? Just take the
No.
vote. Okay. Mr. Ballant,
What was that, please?
are you ready
Waiting
for the roll?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Evans, Mr. Mercurio,
Aye.
and Mr. Comerford.
I abstain.
Motion passes. I need a motion to go into executive session in accordance with ORC 121.22G1, employment dismissal, evaluation, appointment, compensation, and discipline of a public employee, official, or regulated individual, in accordance with ORC 1.22G6, safety and security.
So moved?
Seconded.
Mrs. Weber?
Mr. Ballant,
Aye.
Mr. Mercurio,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Comerford,
Aye.
and Mr. Evans.
Motion passes. We do not expect any type of a vote. We are now adjourned. Thank you.